I think you should be able to joke about anything as long as you can make it funny.
If you're starting to slide into, making fun of others, you're doing something entirely different than what I think humor should be doing.
What offends people varies so much. Whose offense counts, I guess, is the main question.
I'm Julie Rose, and this is Top of Mind. I have been a radio journalist for 2 decades, but a few years ago, I found myself avoiding the news for long stretches because of how depressing and divisive it all seems. I still wanted to be informed and engaged on important issues, though, and I figured I couldn't be alone in that. So we created this podcast. Each episode, we tackle one tough topic in a way that will challenge you, help you feel more empathy, and empower you to become a better citizen, a kinder neighbor, and a more effective advocate. Today, why is it so hard to agree on the line between funny and too far?
Comedy does not come from comfortability, because comedy is what? Tension and release. Hey everyone, my name is Isak Allen. I'm a stand-up comedian out of Los Angeles, California.
So we figured an episode about humor should start with somebody who does it for a living and also wrestles with where to draw the line on topics like race, which Isak Allen jokes about a lot.
If you haven't laughed at y'all yet, I'm assuming it's just because you're still trying to figure out ethnically what I am.
This is a bit from Isak Allen's Dry Bar comedy special, which you can watch on YouTube.
The best way to describe what this face means is half of me built the railroads in this country, and the other half told the first half to do that. My mom hates that joke a lot. Guess which one she is.
The railroad joke is just, to me, that was just a silly one-liner. It was the first, kind of Asian joke I thought of. But it worked in my white side, too, and it was just, and my mom really does not like that joke.
Yeah, so why not? Why does she really not like that
just
joke?
Just because of the history of, white people in America and Chinese people building the railroads and things like that.
It's a painful history related to exclusion and
it's she wasn't even a part of it, but it's again, that's what she's taught in her culture is to that stuff is so bad. And then she moves over here. I mean, she dealt with racism herself, coming over here from Hong Kong, being like a full-blooded tiny Chinese woman,
And your dad?
He's a white dude from Flint, Michigan.
On my white side, it's a lot of German. Very, very German. I speak German almost fluently. I speak it pretty much fluently. So after the show, if you speak German, don't talk to me because I'm lying. But I speak it pretty fluently, and I love the language. I think it gets a bad rap because here they just show us German propaganda, basically. They all sound like mean. When you listen to the language, it's kind of nice. And also, their language gives you an insight into how they think. The efficiency, literal, that's very German. For example, look at the translations from English to German, literally, and you will see how German minds work, all right? We say things in our language, in English, like, have fun, right? That's what you guys are doing now. Fun is just something you can have. You want some fun? Here, take some. Oh, look, I found some fun back here. You want it? Go take it. Germans say, mach Spaß, which literally translates to make fun. Because you're not allowed to just have fun. In German, you think you can just have the fun lying around? Or you think the fun just grows on the fun tree, and then you just climb the fun tree like a little fun monkey, and you grab the fun fruit, and this is delicious fun fruit. And the fun juice drips down the fun chin and the fun chest onto the fun ground. You think that's how this works? You didn't even plant that fun seed. That's someone else's. It grew into the fun tree, and you stole the fun fruit. You are a fun thief, and you steal fun. That is who you are.
Funny story about that. The Germans came at me so hard.
What were they mad about? Mad about your accent? Mad that you were...
This is exactly
what you were saying about them?
This is exactly what's the funniest part. They were mad about the grammar, which is so German of them. And I was talking about it on stage once, and I guess the grammar is technically wrong from what I was saying. I was taught that Mach Spaß means make fun. But apparently they do say Hab Spaß, which means have fun. But when the fun is had, then you say, oh, das hat Spaß gemacht, which means that fun was made. So technically the bit still works. It's just I needed to use the predicative or whatever. I don't even know what it's called anymore. And it's so funny. So they're all hammering, but they're all saying the same thing. And then other people are commenting going like, this is a very German thread. And then a couple of Germans commented, guys, stop. You're just proving his point about us that we can only make fun. We can't like, and I literally on stage one time got a big laugh. There's a couple of German people in the crowd and I was just told them about what happened. And I was like, you're literally being grammar Nazis. I don't know what other way to put it.
You used that word.
Yeah.
You used Nazis.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. How did that go over?
They got a big laugh because it's just, again, I'm holding up a mirror to themselves while making them see another side of the story. You know what I mean? Another side of the what's happening here. Like, hey, I mean, sometimes the joke is just too perfect. It's right there.
Yeah, I do love that feeling. You know it too? The moment when you get a perfect quip come to mind, and then it gets a big laugh from whoever you're with. Being funny is a big deal in American culture. We want it in our friends and our lovers. We spend lots of money on it too. And these days, we even look to comedians as trusted sources of news and commentary. I'm thinking of John Oliver and Jon Stewart. Well, the good news here is that humor is good for us in lots of ways. Scientists say it makes us physically healthier, it improves relationships, it even makes hard things more enjoyable. But we also all know how fast it can go wrong in the hands of a bully or an edgy stand-up routine that backfires. And the real kicker with comedy is that there is no such thing as a joke everyone finds funny or offensive. Our tastes are so individual that humor is a cultural minefield. So, today on Top of Mind, let's see if we can figure out how to get the most out of humor's upside while keeping the harm to a minimum. Now, the appeal of comedy for stand-up comic Isak Allen was mostly catharsis.
I was like a shy Chinese kid that grew up in Indiana. Didn't have a lot of friends. I only knew 2 other Asian kids in my high school. I was small too. I was a late bloomer. There were hard elements to it as far as just people will judge you based on what you look like, right? There's something about the rawness of the comedy where all these like gut feelings and these things that I wanted to get off my chest, but I didn't want to be negative and sad about it. I wanted to make light of it and make fun of it. I finally started just blurting this stuff out on a stage, and next thing you know, it's working. People are just liking they're picking up what I'm putting down.
It happened on a whim. He was living in San Diego after getting his degree in neuroscience.
I had some dead-end clinical lab tech job that paid me enough to get by, but it was just annoying. I just drove by a comedy club one day called the Comedy Palace, which no longer exists. It was a Greek restaurant by day and a comedy club by night. And I saw that there was an open mic, and I literally just did a U-turn. I had some ideas in a notebook. Still never really intended on talking about it. But I did a U-turn. I went in, signed up. The guy was like, hey, you're going to be like 30th. Can you wait that long? And I was like, yep. And I just sat in a booth for like 2 hours and just waited. And then I did 5 minutes of terrible jokes. But I got enough laughs to I kind of caught the bug. And I was like, oh, I never expressed myself like this before and was this vulnerable with just a public who related. And that's all she wrote.
So Allen had a lot to get off his chest about race, but he didn't really go there in his stand-up routine at first.
I tried to avoid it, which was kind of a mistake because I just didn't want to be known. Because the other thing with comedy is there's a lot of what you would call hacky comedy or sort of cliched run-of-the-mill internet, what are now internet jokes type thing where it's like, here's my Asian bad driver joke. Here's my black guy bad credit joke. And it's just like, all right, these were done in the 80s, the 90s, 70s, whatever. And I just wanted to avoid racial stuff up top. But now that I'm better at comedy, I'm like, I can bring those back and just have a unique outlook.
Yeah. So is anything off limits for you with regard to being biracial or with regard to your Asian identity? Like, I wonder if you feel like I can say whatever I want about Asians and being an Asian, white, biracial person because that is my identity. Therefore, I have, I have free reign to tell my jokes.
That's a good question because with society, it's one thing, right? Society, you could almost call it like society's algorithm or something where it's like, hey, if you're not the thing, you can't joke about the thing. I think, like a lot of people I know, I think you should be able to joke about anything. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as you can make it funny. If it doesn't become funny, then get rid of it. You know what I mean? Anything taboo, I mean, it just has to have an original angle, whether it be race or anything else.
Original meaning you've never heard it before, or original meaning it doesn't just play to obvious stereotypes?
Good question. It's kind of both. It's like, it's obvious stereotype one, and I don't know if it's like never heard it before so much as just something that's been done to death. Like if if like if a white comedian or whatever does an Asian accent, but it's just like clearly it's just like you ever go to the Chinese restaurant, they're in the kitchen and they're like, order number two, order number one. Like if they do that, then it's like, I'm in the back literally like this. But here's the thing. The crowd is too usually. And I think it's because I think they recognize that's not genuine at all. I do a joke about how like I kind of talk with Blaccent, I guess the Gen Zers are calling it, when I'm around black people. I've done that joke for years. Always kills. And black people tend to love it the most, but white people do too.
Okay. I'm glad he brought this joke up because when I saw it on his dry bar comedy special, I laughed pretty hard. And it builds to this great Obama impression at the end. But I was also kind of like, wait, can he do that? Let's listen.
People forget culture and heritage are different, right? You know what I mean? Heritage is just, your blood, who you are. You might be a little Irish, a little Scottish, a little, German, Chinese, whatever you are. But your culture is like who you grew up around. And I think that influences who you are more than anything. Right? Your friends, your family, the people you're with right now, it's your culture. In Indianapolis, it was all black and white people. So I consider myself very culturally black and white. I talk very white around white people, as you can tell. And I talk very black around black people. Always an awkward silence, every show I've done, every time I say that. I don't care, judge me all you want. Those are my friends and family, I don't even care. You can judge me, all right? I say things like finna. I'm finna go do some comedy. When I want someone to repeat something, I say, give it to me one mo again. And they usually do. And most importantly, when I want to get at the end of a story, but I don't feel like telling the middle of the story, I say things like woo-woo to propel me to the end of that story. All right, confused white people, let me explain. Woo-woo is just a black version of the phrase, one thing led to another. That's all that is. It's just to take up 80% of a middle of a story you don't feel like telling. Here's a black dude telling a story. Hey man, me and my boys cruising up to this club, and all of a sudden it's like, woo-woo-woo. Dudes would come up and say, ah, and I was like, ah, woo-woo-woo. My friend's like, whoop-de-woo. And dudes was like, ah, woo-woo-woo on this side, ah, and then I fell off a bridge. And you're like, you don't want to clear up the middle of that? You went to a club and then bridge falling off. That's how that story went. If it was a book, it'd be prologue, woo-woo, epilogue, end of book. Why are they building bridges near clubs? What city are you in? You just never know. As a matter of fact, that's how I thought Obama should have just pacified white people who didn't like him in his speeches to just confuse them and leave. How great would that have been? He just goes up there, listen. Now, they questioned my health care. And you know what? They questioned my birth certificate as well. And, to those people, I just have one thing to say. Woo, 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 legalize gay marriage. Thank you very much.
I've never gotten heckled because of that bit. I've posted it multiple times on multiple platforms. I've never seen any comments that have any kind of backlash to that. I think I like to think comedy crowds are kind of smart. And I like think people in general are smart enough to notice these things where just whether or not you're being genuine. And it's that bit does not come from me just going like, what if I talked like a black person? Like it wasn't that at all. I just was like, what if I tell the story about why I talk this way around my friends? And because people don't expect that. Again, it's the juxtaposition of it. And some people have said like, oh, you get away with it because you're part Asian. I don't think it's weird. I think they're right in a sense, maybe, but again, I think it's more about the being genuine aspect of it. Me saying that I'm talking black around black people is not malicious in any way. It's just my experience from my heart and my past and my childhood. But if I was to say that, if I was to use every example of how I talk black or whatever, every example of that was something stereotypically bad about black people. Like I did a black character who was like robbing a store, or I did a black character who was just getting angry all the time, or something like that. Then that might, it's still not, it depends on what the joke is, but that's still leaning more towards the area of like, okay, now his intent is a little bit more messed up. You know what I mean? It's a little bit more denigrating, maybe.
And so is that a problem? Would you be fair game to get called out?
I don't think it's problematic. I think it's just bad. It would be bad comedy, if someone did that.
So the greatest offense for you is to not be funny in an original way.
Exactly. As long as it comes from that genuine gut feeling or something that you've experienced yourself and gave you a fresh angle on it, then I don't think anybody can mess with you.
Isak Allen is a stand-up comedian based in LA. Thanks to the Dry Bar for giving us permission to play a few clips from his very funny special, which you can watch right now on YouTube and at drybarcomedy.com. Isak spells his name I-S-A-K, by the way. What do you think about his take on comedy that so long as it's funny, original, and authentic, it's fair game? I know some pretty famous and pretty dead folks who would disagree.
The ancient philosophers like Plato and Aristotle thought of humor primarily as mockery, and mockery is something that was not great it was a vice, right? So it's a thing that's mean, a thing that disrupts social harmony and cohesion.
And so they said humor had no place in civilized society. Were they right? I'm Julie Rose. This is Top of Mind. Hey folks, it's Julie. Can I recommend quickly another podcast I think you're really going to dig? It's called A Braver Way with Monica Guzman, and it's from our friends at Braver Angels. You've heard Monica on Top of Mind before, talking about how to engage with perspectives you really disagree with. And each episode of her podcast, A Braver Way, introduces us to people from across the political spectrum who are taking the toxicity out of our politics, not by watering down their convictions, but by letting them clash and come into conversation. And the goal for their current season, which I love, is to help us face this election year without losing heart. So, check out A Braver Way at braverangels.org/abraverway or by searching for A Braver Way in your favorite podcast app. Now, back to Top of Mind. In addition to being mostly just mean, the ancient Greeks thought humor was a sign of weakness, says philosophy professor Louvel Anderson.
Plato in particular treated laughter like an emotion that overrides rational self-control. And for Plato, it's all about, maintaining that rational self-control. And so if you have something like laughter that gets in the way of that, that's going to be a bad thing. So you see this idea picked up mainly by, for example, the Christian church, who also had a very skeptical attitude towards humor. You see this also, I think, in the 5th century church father, John Chrysostom, who wrote that laughter gives rise to foul discourse, which in turn leads to foul actions.
And that view of humor pretty much prevails until the post-Enlightenment period in the 1700s, says Anderson, when you start to see famous philosophers giving laughter a more positive spin.
The idea starts to develop that, it might also be a way of relieving stress, for example.
Over time, philosophers have settled on 3 main views of humor.
So one is what's called the superiority theory, where the reason we laugh at stuff is because we find the object of our laughter somehow inferior to ourselves. So it's really that mocking form again.
That one seems to be especially popular in today's politics and punditry.
There's the relief or release theory.
This is the second one.
That says, in our ordinary everyday lives, it's a kind of seriousness. There are certain topics or subjects that we repress, so we can't really speak about in polite company. But humor gives us, a comedy gives us an opportunity to let down our guard a bit and sort of relieve the stress that the repression brings about.
Hollywood has perfected that form with the raunchy comedy genre that leans into laughs about sex and violence. On a simple level, it's also what's happening when someone breaks the tension in a room with a quip.
And then the third, I guess, major view is what's sometimes called the incongruity theory. It says, well, we find things funny that pose a kind of incongruous juxtaposition between certain kinds of things, right? So there's a kind of built-up expectation that's dashed in the end, for example. It's a kind of juxtaposition between things that don't seem to go together.
Yeah, this is my favorite kind of humor. It's Far Side comics and stand-up routines that make you laugh and squirm and also think. But to quote my dad's favorite Latin phrase, de gustibus non est disputandum. Matters of taste cannot be disputed.
I think one thing that makes it so hard is that what offends people or what people find offensive varies so much that there's little agreement, I think, even less agreement now, on what makes something offensive or wrong or impolite. So it might also, and this is I think a suspicion a lot of people hold, right, is that it seems like people have less tolerance for subtlety. And so if someone is attempting to do something subversive, for example, with something that is normally understood as offensive, people just don't really have the patience to sit through it and figure out what that person's trying to do with it. So I think back to, for example, Stephen Colbert when he was hosting the Colbert Report. And he did a segment satirizing the Washington Football Club and the Washington Football Club's owner, Dan Snyder, for creating this a charitable organization for Native Americans.
This was back in 2014, when the team's name was still a racial slur for Native Americans.
So it was just sort of a thing that's ripe for satire. Colbert, in the show, used another racist caricature to try to sort of highlight the hypocrisy of this juxtaposition.
Now, the name of Colbert's satirical charity included a couple of derogatory references to Asian Americans. When the show tweeted about it, the hashtag Cancel Colbert backlash was swift.
And so it kicked off this discussion about, well, okay, we understand that he was doing satire. We know what the point of that was. Nonetheless, his use of the caricature was itself sort of racially insensitive or racist, however people were describing it. Right? And so it raised this question about, well, can you perform racial satire in a way that you're not complicit in reproducing the racism that you're trying to satirize?
This is the stuff we were most interested in discussing with Lou Val Anderson for this episode. He's a professor at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and his expertise is how humor and race intersect. Was it racist of Colbert to use racist language to satirically call out racism? Anderson argues for a more subtle analysis that includes 3 categories of race-related humor.
What I call merely racial, racially insensitive, and racist humor.
In Anderson's view, a joke is racist when it uses slurs or stereotypes that reinforce the racial stratification of society.
Saying things that communicate to people you belong in this lower social status, that reinforces segregationist values, for example.
On the other hand, says Anderson, it's possible for a joke about race to make people uncomfortable, maybe even mad, and not be racist.
In trying to tell a joke, let's say, you could try to subvert that racially stratified social order, that tell people you recognize we live in this social order, and 2, that this social order shouldn't exist. So if you try to do that, and you can also reasonably expect that your audience will understand that that's what you're trying to do, then I say, well, that joke is then merely what I call merely racial.
Okay. So if you're pointing out, for example, elsewhere in this episode, I'm speaking with a comic named Isak Allen who he does this joke about how sports announcers talk about the speed of black athletes different than the speed of white athletes. So he's pointing out, a kind of a stereotype or a bias.
Every time a black athlete runs down the field, you guys are watching today in your college sports, every time a black athlete, he's got blazing speed, look at him go. And then a white dude catches him, they're like, he was deceptively fast.
Is that what you would categorize as merely racial?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right? It's a thing that you can recognize, oh, he's pointing to something that's a weird feature we might take for granted of our society. but pointing out its absurdity. And we all recognize that that's what he's doing. And then I say, well, a person can intend to do that work, but then misjudge whether or not their audience will recognize that that is what they're doing. So this is what I call racially insensitive racial humor.
So there's merely racial on the one hand, racist on the other, and in the middle is humor that's racially insensitive, says Anderson.
You might make a joke about race, again, intending to subvert this stratified social order, but maybe there's something about the audience that you're performing this joke for that makes it harder for them to recognize that you're trying to subvert something rather than, say, reinforce it.
That Colbert Report satirical send-up of the Washington Football Club's charity might fall here. Or here's another example, says Anderson.
So I don't know if you recall that time where Michael Richards was performing.
Michael Richards, he was Kramer on Seinfeld.
That's right. And there was a heckler, a black man was heckling him in the audience. He got upset and started basically yelling the N-word at the guy.
Now, angrily calling someone a racial slur to their face counts as racist in Anderson's definition, and Richards was widely criticized for it. But what happened next is where the ambiguity comes in for Anderson.
Maybe a month or so later, Andy Dick,
another comedian,
was on some show, and he tried to basically recall this episode, I guess in an attempt to mock it. So he just sort of ends his appearance by just blurting out the N-word. And a lot of people were offended by Dick as well, because it just, again, wasn't really clear what he was trying to do. I mean, you got the sense that he was referring to the Michael Richards thing, but you didn't really know what he was trying to do with it. So I would think that Andy Dick was being racially insensitive at that moment.
Well, but in that case, he was explicitly using this word that is, to many people, inherently offensive. Yep. So, I mean, is the use of the N-word, can it be sometimes racially insensitive and sometimes it's just straight out racist?
Yeah, I think so. Because I don't myself think that just merely saying the word across all contexts is automatically racist. The execution matters, and the rules are also always changing. I think what the public is willing to put up with changes quite a bit. So I'm looking at the 70s, I'm looking at Don Rickles. I think Don Rickles really can't exist today. Because the kind of edgy insult humor that often played on racial stereotypes, racial slurs, etc., there was a kind of tolerance for that in that space, that moment, that people just don't have the patience for now. Interestingly, though, before Louis C.K. met his sort of public fall, he had a bit where he uses the N-word, which I think was largely acceptable publicly anyway. I don't remember much public flack for his routine on this, so I don't know if you remember the routine, but it's basically, he had this joke where he says he hates when people use the phrase, the N-word, because it basically puts the actual word into your mind and makes you, the listener, responsible for thinking the actual word when the person that's used this phrase, the N-word,
is absolved from, like they're like putting on you the use of this word, and that's an interesting thought. But he actually said the N-word, all the letters, the word itself.
I think that's right.
And in that sense, it was in the context of calling into question the incongruity of our sensitivity around that word, or the way that it is used, maybe, or policed. I mean, sometimes we'll see, it's not unusual to see a Black comic using it sort of, it's not the punchline. It's like, he might be telling a joke and he's talking about talking to a friend, another Black friend, and it's just part of like how I talk to my friends, right? So it might come across in a situation like that. So
it seems to be just something that's accepted about a certain style of Black humor.
Okay.
So, I mean, this is basically what Chappelle's routines are like this, Chris Rock, Cat Williams, where it's just accepted as the way that they speak. Which, yeah, the white comedian or a non-black comedian can't really pull that off because, one, I think it's still just not it's not a thing that people will accept as just a manner of speaking for these individuals in the way that you can for Chappelle or Williams or Rock.
And Anderson notes something similar seems to apply when a comedian does an impression of someone who's a different race.
There does seem to be less flack for comedians of color doing that. And it's weird, right? Because I think of the Key and Peele show where they did a bunch of characters that were Indian or Latino.
Key and Peele are both African-American comedians.
So they seem to be participating in a kind of brown face or yellow face in certain instances. But the reaction isn't as strong. There seems to be people see a difference in what they do as opposed to, I think it was a Ted Danson where he went to the Friars Club in blackface. At the time, I think he was dating Whoopi Goldberg.
Right.
And people were quite offended by that.
And here you're talking about whether or not people will give them flack. You're not necessarily talking about whether or not it is clearly racist. If we think back to your definitions, it might just be merely racial, but people are going to be offended. It might be racially insensitive, depending on what you're saying or how you're doing it. But you're probably going to get some flack no matter what.
Yeah, that's true.
And Anderson says whether or not people are offended by a joke should not be the only thing we consider.
Because I think, for example, there's humor that targets the elite or the powerful, who they might also take to be very offensive. But I think its offense is a good thing. It's a thing that undermines a kind of abuse of power, or can undermine a kind of abuse of power. So I wouldn't want to say that it's being offensive is a bad thing there.
Okay, all right. So it kind of matters what your intent is or what the purpose of the joke is. Is that right? So, like, if my intent is I'm being offensive, but I'm targeting somebody who's worthy of, my vitriol or worthy of being degraded in some way because they're a person of power, because they've done something everybody agrees is awful. Like, in that sense, I'm okay to tell that joke.
Yeah. I just think there are a number of things we have to weigh. And some things being offensive isn't an automatic disqualifier.
What else would you weigh?
I think one important thing to think about is whether or not this reinforces certain kinds of oppressive policies or tendencies. So, for example, if you have a popular comedian or a popular site, forum, show, or whatever, that tells mean or offensive humor about a particular group, that seems to justify treating members of that group in negative ways, that seems to be a clear instance where you want to say that that kind of humor it shouldn't be because it has these negative effects. But if you don't have a situation like that, where you just have humor that might offend someone who's a member of that particular group, I don't know, do we always want to say, well, that kind of humor shouldn't exist or shouldn't be told?
Why would we not want to?
So I wonder if we would lose out on creativity or innovation in some significant way, for one. And two, I also wonder about what the implications of that might be. That is, like, how exactly do we draw the line in a way that doesn't, for example, reward what we might think of as irrational offense. Because again, people can be offended for all sorts of things. Like once upon a time, and maybe for some still, people were offended, for example, people were offended by interracial couples or same-sex couples. And so the knowledge that these kinds of couples exist can be offensive for people. Is that a thing we want to outlaw because it offends people? I don't think so. Right? But then once we bring those kinds of considerations into mind, we really have to go through these cases and sort out, okay, when is it okay to say this kind of thing should be ruled out because it offends a certain group. Whose offense counts, I guess, is the main question. Whose offense should determine what we deem is acceptable or unacceptable.
Louvel Anderson is a professor of philosophy at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He's currently writing a book on the ethics of racial humor. So, if we can't agree on what's offensive, or even what's funny, maybe the ancient Greeks were right that humor is best avoided in civilized society. Or maybe we just need to aim for a different kind of humor in our everyday interactions where it matters most.
You're not actually going for what comics are going for, which are actual laugh out louds. I think of humor as a kindness, because when we share humor with one another, we're building the sorts of personal connections that we like.
Next on Top of Mind, the potential of humor to help make things go more smoothly in life, and maybe even in the workplace. I'm Julie Rose. Hey, it's Julie, inviting you to embark on a whimsical journey with The Appleseed from the BYU Radio family of podcasts. Immerse yourself in captivating stories, expertly woven by talented storytellers. Join host Sam Payne and the live studio audience in laughter and delight as they explore a tapestry of tales. Tune in to The Appleseed for a family-friendly experience that sparks imagination and brings stories to life. It's your ticket to fun and creativity. Find The Appleseed wherever you listen to podcasts. When Mike Kundal told me about his consulting business, I was very skeptical.
I go to, companies and organizations and talk to them about how important it is to have humor and laughter more present in their day-to-day. And research that I've done has shown that if you're a boss and you're seen as humorous, you can reduce feelings of burnout in the people that work for and with you by 15%.
Kundal is a professor of philosophy at North Carolina A&T State University. His consulting company is called Mirth Management. And I initially talked with him for a different Top of Mind episode about retirement. But in the process, he said, hey, let's talk humor one of these days. To which I basically scoffed and said, yeah, if you're advocating for more bosses cracking jokes in staff meeting or coworkers sharing memes on the company Slack channel, that's a hard pass for me. Look, I'm not a complete humor humbug, but it feels to me like corporate efforts to make fun, as the Germans might say, sap time away from getting my work done. And inviting people to yuck it up more freely at work just seems like a controversy waiting to happen. But Mike Kundal is adamant that I am wrong. So, in the name of staying curious, I said, okay, let's talk.
Humor and laughter don't just simply give us a break from work. They help us enjoy our experiences when we're working, when we're engaged in serious pursuits. And we've forgotten that because we think, well, if you're doing fun stuff, you can't obviously be doing work. You can't be working towards getting those deliverables delivered. And I said, and that's just the absolute wrong way to look at it. And we have really good evidence as to why that's bad. Just look at the disengagement numbers and how high they've been and how long they've been high for the past 20 years. And one of the huge reasons is people do not enjoy where they work. And you can create enjoyment through laughter and humor.
But can't it often come off as forced and kind of cringy? And potentially, not okay at worst, maybe even tone deaf or insensitive.
Yes, all of those things, but that's no different than anything else that you can try, right? People look at pizza parties, at leadership with the same sort of tin ear, or this has been done to death, or what are we really accomplishing here? So you start easy and you start small.
What would be an example?
So first thing, just let people express their personality in certain ways. If your office I don't want your office to look like a kindergarten's classroom, but it shouldn't be grayish or institutional beige or devoid of all things that make us human. If you're trying to, as, the manager or the leader, whoever it is, if you're trying to kind of create this environment, then the first thing you do is start showing the sorts of things that you find enjoyable and funny. And really reach out. When we share laughter with one another, when we share things that we find amusing, that's a relation that we create with one another that's pretty deep and important. Because we don't talk first, we laugh. We cry, and then we laugh in development. Laughter is very early. It's so important that the Navajo tribe celebrates the child's first laugh as their real entry into the world. They're really people at that point because they're able to find humor. And when you share that with people, I love watching comics break up, or like Saturday Night Live when people break out of character and they're laughing, because I'm in on the joke. I'm sharing that humor and levity with them. That's one of the reasons it's so powerful, because it's such a deeply enjoyable experience. And when I use humor, I reach out to you to share that enjoyment with me. It's also one of the reasons I don't like when people tend to ridicule one another, because you're using this joyful interaction as a weapon. And that seems to be really, really a misuse of that tool, of that social interaction. If you're starting to slide into, making fun of others for things that they say or do or behaviors, you're doing something entirely different than what I think humor should be doing.
At least in the context that you're talking about. So it almost sounds like you're describing a kind of gentle humor with a different goal than, your stand-up comics who are doing political satire or who are doing, roasts or trying to get their hour-long specials. This is interpersonal humor, and you have to, and it should have different rules.
Absolutely. When I talk to folks, I said, when you're going and using humor as a teacher, like I am as a philosophy professor, or as a leader, you're not actually going for what comics are going for, which are actual laugh out louds. I joke and say, you want people to do when they type in LOL in their phone, which is where they kind of go, lol. They just cock their head, or they smile, or they kind of exhale a little bit with a, kind of a humming sound. You're not doing comedy, you're doing humor. And you are absolutely right, Julie. Humor, satire, comedy, these are different things. And they have different goals, and they have different expectations. If you're at a roast, then sarcasm and punching hard humor is going to be appropriate. And the interesting thing is, you don't get mad at the roaster for roasting you, because you know why you're there. And we do this when we tease our friends and family, right? You can tease people that you know very well. You probably do. You're not necessarily going to tease me because you don't know me that well. So there are times, and there's one study out there that I'm aware of that has shown that if you're in a work environment and people aren't and it's a close working environment, and people aren't teasing and kind of joking with one another in that sort of rough and tumble way, then they're not nearly as close as you think they are, because you're holding back. I have a great story, if you want me to tell it, about, so I work at a historically black college or university, and I was part of a committee that was dealt with, it was a gala for our students and faculty. It was an awards gala. And one of the discussions was food. Well, what food are we going to get this year? And it's mostly African-American folks. I'm pretty much the only white guy in the room, which is typical. And it's mostly women. And they're all pretty good friends of mine. And they start talking about chicken wings and food. And one of my friends popped up and said, look, I know we're the black university, but do we always have to eat like we're the black university? And one of my other colleagues just jumped right in and said, oh, quit being bougie. And then it was on. Like, everyone was just poking fun at the other one, and they were joking and teasing. And it was like, as you can imagine, it was rough and tumble. And here I am in this room where everyone is having this discussion about racially based food, and I'm like the white guy. And it was deeply uncomfortable, as you can imagine. And one of my friends, she looked over at me and kind of noticed that I was shrinking away as much as I could. And she said, so Dr. Kundl, do you have anything that you want to say, any opinion about any of this? And I just looked at her and I said, I don't have anything to say about any of this. But it was she was teasing me, but her teasing me was bringing me into that conversation, acknowledging that it was weird, knowing that I wasn't going to, step in and play, but being playful with me nonetheless, right? And then everyone smiled, and and they got to have a little fun at the white guy's expense, which is totally awesome in that situation, right? And I leaned into that part, and it is one of my core memories of working at A&T was this playful discussion.
Okay, but so how does an organization create a culture of humor that will do more good than harm? Because once you sort of make clear, hey, teasing's okay, we value humor and, meme sharing on the Slack channel or whatever, somebody's going to cross the line. Somebody's going to get, and then there's potential blowback, but you've opened your organization up to that. How do you make sure that you aren't opening a can of worms?
Right. So there are two worries in the question. Is that it's kind of this all or nothing thinking. Once you've opened the door, it's a weird sort of slippery slope argument. Okay, so I sent this meme that was just 2 inches over the line, and then Bob sends the meme that's 2.5 inches, and then Cheryl sends the meme that's 10 inches. Right. There are ways to self-police. Absolutely. Say things like, we like this environment. We like to share humor. We do like to tease on occasion, but we do want to be respectful of the person and the individual. When someone gets offended, as someone probably will, when someone gets hurt or takes something a way it might not have been intended or a way it might have been intended, who knows, then we have to, as a functioning unit with people involved, have to deal with it. Like you have to, if you're the boss, and you see this coming up or someone expresses to you a discomfort, then you have the difficult discussion about what's going on here. And sometimes an apology is in order. Sometimes it's not necessarily an apology, but I understand you were trying to be funny. Please understand that was not something that I found funny. And then an example is my college professor loved puns, loved them. And he had a colleague who just hated puns. And he would do 1 or 2 puns in a faculty meeting, and then she would pop up and say, okay, that was your last one. And they kind of developed this little way of navigating, yes, I know that you like it. And in a sense, this is very much like a relationship, right? And I understand where a boss could just look at this and say, I don't want to deal with any of this. It is just,
exactly.
It's a minefield.
Too risky.
And no one's going to win here. But this is also one of the things that leads us into the situation we are with politics. No one wants to deal with it because it's a minefield. Well, the minefield is our day-to-day interactions with everybody. And if we don't make them better, we're just going to keep cleaving off and hyper, sectioning ourselves to our own little groups of people. And that, more than anything else, I think is one of the worst problems that we're facing.
Have you experienced humor as a way to actually do something difficult?
Oh, yeah.
In a group setting?
Absolutely. So one of my favorites is at some point my students want to know what it's like for me as a white guy at A&T, right, where I work. Like it's a natural question, but it's a difficult question, especially for my students to bring up because I'm the professor. There's like no spot in my syllabus that says, oh, in week 7, we're going to discuss that Mike's a white guy at A&T. It's just difficult to get into. So I look at my students and I'll get a sense when they want to ask that question. And I'll say, okay, let's talk about the fact that I'm melanin challenged. And your reaction right there.
I smiled broadly there.
You smiled broadly,
melanin,
your shoulders dropped a little bit. And because of that humor, you're not paying attention to the difficulty of race or even the difficult concepts that we're talking about now. You're coming off of it with this nice little lilting intro into the discussion because I made a goofy little statement. And I get so much mileage out of that because it's clever. We like it. And people are like, I see what you did there. And then we can have the discussion. And on the heels of that lightness, the heaviest discussion is made much easier. It's what humor does. It makes subsequent experiences, like if you're experiencing physical pain, you will experience pain as less painful when humor is around. So if you're getting ready to go in and deal with medical stuff, get some humor in there. And it's not like 10 minutes before. It can be, as long as you have a good dose of humor going up through, like days before, you're going to report that situation as being less. It has this wonderfully insulating effect, which is why I encourage it, because the effect persists well beyond the time that you make the joke. I think of humor as a kindness. I'm being kind when I share things that I find funny with you, because I want you to find them funny too. And I feel great when I share that humor with you. And I think you do too. Like sharing it together makes that feeling stronger.
So what are the steps? What are the tips that you can offer to doing humor as a kindness? As opposed to, I will be quite frank, a lot of my humor ends up I don't know. I think a lot of us have a default toward sarcasm that's a little more cutting, teasing that also has an agenda, that's kind of motivated by frustration or jealousy or, anger, whatever it is, right? So what do you do? What can I do to make sure that my humor is a kindness?
So I didn't know we'd be doing therapy with you today, Julie, but let me take a stab at it. But no, you're right, because when you start thinking about humor, and when I started thinking about this sort of thing, I really started to wonder how my humor was coming off. I became a much more critical user of humor. If you're trying to be kind to that other person and you're masking your frustration through humor, they might not get that you're frustrated. As someone who does, I've had to tell myself in places to not use humor and say, no, this is something that bothers me. And while I would joke about it, I'm afraid that my joking is going to let you think that this is less than important. Also, start with what you think kindness is. Like when you reach out to someone and you're using humor, how are you trying to improve your day, their day, our day? Like what is that goal that you've got there? And it doesn't have to be like some lofty, I'm going to move the needle on some social issue. Did you smile and laugh, and did we have a slightly better day? Like, that's it. And I don't think I've got an article that I want to write called just like lo-fi goofy humor, that we should not, shame people for, liking silly stuff, right? Because it's fun. Not everything has to be, Jonathan Swift level satire. It can be just a 14 or 15-year-old boy joke. And if all they're doing is joking and having fun, well, we should encourage that, because we have far too little of it in our day-to-day, and we squeeze it out of our spaces, whether they be work or religious spaces, and it makes our life, the word I'm using now is, when we have humor and laughter present in our lives, that life is nourishing. When it's missing, we can get nutrition, but we don't get the nourishment that we really want and need. And I think when we're kind to one another, we're helping fulfill that nourishment.
Mike Kundal is a professor of philosophy at North Carolina A&T University. He's author of The Humor Hack and a founder of Mirth Management Consulting. Thank you so much for your time today, Professor.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it, and thank you.
He kind of convinced me. I probably won't start sending memes in the office Slack channel, and I will never be a fan of forced fun at work. But I am definitely sitting with some discomfort around my own approach to humor and what I might change there. That was a stick-with-it experience for me, as we like to call it. And one of the goals of this podcast is to help us practice sticking with the discomfort of a challenging idea so that we get to a place of more empathy or more clarity. I'd love to hear about a perspective or a situation that's challenged you recently. And be sure to check out my new podcast called Uncomfy, where people share their own stick-with-it stories every week. Large or small, these opportunities pop up all the time in our lives, and we want to get better at taking advantage of them. You can find Uncomfy, sticking with moments that challenge us, now on YouTube, Spotify, or any other podcast app. And it's a video podcast, so that's a fun bonus. Top of Mind is a BYU radio podcast. Today's episode was produced by Jacob Smith and me, with help from James Hoops, Sam Payne, and Samuel Benson. Our sound design team includes Gabe Vargas, Kelsey Ney, and Brandon Lewis. I'm Julie Rose. We'll talk soon.